So we're going to take you through a roast now, and we're going to talk about airflow as we do that. Let me go ahead and start my Artisan. And I am starting my Artisan on a brand new Mac with the M2 chip. Okay, so I'm turning on my gas. I've got my airflow at about 2.5, and I'm going to reset my timer and charge my beans. I'm actually roasting 5.5 pounds of Mexican chiapas. Okay, closing my hopper. My airflow is now at about 3, and I'll monitor that airflow. My drum speed is at 80%, or on the BC58 number 8, which is 80%, and my KPA is low. I'm gonna crank it up because this is a huge load. I'm gonna crank it up all the way to 4. And because this is the first load and I may not have preheated it as long as I should have, it probably is going to take longer than 5 minutes, maybe more like 6 or 7 minutes to reach the end of drying phase. But as it's doing that, I'm going to be closely monitoring my tryer spoon to see if there's a lot of chaff being released, which there isn't yet. The roast has only been in there about a minute. And I'll be looking through my viewer window, and I'll also be looking through my debris tray, which you can see a little bit of debris has already started to fall in there, and which might tend to indicate that when it starts releasing chaff, since the drum is pretty much full with 5.5 pounds, that I should probably bump my airflow up to 4. And as I bump my airflow up to 4, on my airflow gauge, I can see it's at about 6 or 7, about 6 or 7 on the airflow gauge. And I'm going to keep a close eye as this roast develops during the drying phase, because oftentimes a lot of chaff is released during the drying phase. As you can see, just a little bit is in there now, but I'm going to keep track of that. Now, if I were not to have my airflow up high enough and a lot of debris or chaff starts falling in there, I would want to first turn up my airflow, and then second, take and dump this out in some kind of a metal container, or in this case, I'm dropping it on my concrete floor because it wasn't that much, to get it out of the way. And now I got a clean slate on my debris tray. I'm watching through my viewing window, and unfortunately I cannot put another camera on that for you to see right at the moment, because I want you to see the controls. But right at the moment, I'm not seeing excessive chaff yet being released. Of course, it's only 219 degrees on the bean temp at about 3 minutes. So as it develops and gets its way up to 320 degrees, I suspect it will drop more debris, and I'll have to keep a close eye on whether I need to up the airflow. But right now I've got the airflow set at 4. And we'll see how that does. Keeping in mind, if this was a 1-pound roast and very few beans were tumbling through the drum, I may only have this up to 2.5. Rarely, if ever, would I ever turn the airflow below 2. Maybe when I'm starting it, before I put beans in it, just to get the flame lit, or maybe when I am, after I've preheated and I've turned off the gas to see how quick it drops, then I may turn down the airflow a little bit, just to make sure that the metals in the drum are close to what the thermocouples are saying they are. But when I'm roasting, I never go below 2 on like a 1-pound, half-pound roast. And on a bigger roast, I may go 3, 4, or more, depending on how it does during the drying phase. I can't remember if these Chiapa beans put out a lot of chaff, but I am starting to see chaff in the tryer spoon, which you can see I'm starting to see more in the debris tray, but that little bit I'm not going to worry too much about. But if I were to see more, I would bump this up a little higher. Now, if a bean started producing a lot of chaff, I may temporarily bump this up to like 5, 6, or 7 to get air flowing through the drum to pull all that excessive amount of chaff out. And then after I see that it's done that after a minute and it's still in the drying phase or even in the mallard phase, I may adjust it accordingly. I'm going back to 4 on this because I think it's okay on 4 so far. I don't know if you can see the beans, but we're getting closer to the end of the drying phase. It's now 290 degrees at close to 5.5 minutes. So we'll probably hit 320 at 6.5 minutes. And then I will cut back my gas. I like my drying phase to be on a big roast, like a 5-pound roast, between about 5 and 7 minutes. And afterwards I cut back my gas to slow down the mallard or browning phase. Still watching the chaff. The beans are getting a little more yellow, but they're not at the end of the drying phase yet. Still checking my debris. I see a little bit of debris buildup. I've got it on 4. The airflow through the manual airflow, or through the airflow gauge, is actually fallen below 5. I'm going to bump it up just a little bit more on the airflow. Keep it at about 5 pascal. Oops. So here we are, almost at the end of the drying phase. It's 6 minutes 45 seconds. It's at the end of the drying phase. Mark that on Artisan. And right now, the predictive feature of Artisan is telling me that my roast is going to end at about 10 minutes. I want to take it just a little over 400 degrees, maybe 450 degrees. So I'm going to drop down my gas, but just a little bit, maybe to 3.5 right now, because I want to monitor the rate of rise. First crack is going to be somewhere between, depending on the bean, about 385, 395 degrees. And I don't want it to go from the end of the drying phase to the first crack in a minute. I'd like for it to be about 30% of the roast, or 3 minutes, that is the browning phase. So the caramelization and so forth in the beans can be developing at a nice rate, so that all the flavors in the beans will be highlighted when we're done with this roast. So we'll keep an eye on that. At this point, I'm bumping up my airflow to about 5.5, checking my debris tray. As you can see, just a little bit of debris in there. So most is being pulled out. I'm not seeing any excessive amount through the window or through the tryer spoon. So I think 5.5 right now during the browning phase is pretty good. Remember, our drum speed is at about 80%, on the bigger roasters at 90%. Our gas, depending on where we are in the roast at this point, is at 3.5 kPa because I'm doing 5.5 pounds. My airflow is at 5.5, and I may even bump it up to 6. I want to keep an eye on the rate of rise and the time that's involved in that rate of rise. Looking at my Artisan, I can see that I must have forgotten. I must not have hit the end of the drying phase, but it was at 6 minutes 45 seconds. So if I can go to at least 9 minutes and 45 seconds, or even 10 minutes, that will be right around 30% of the roast would be during the drying phase. And then my mallard phase, or I'm sorry, my roasting phase will be between 1 and 2 minutes on average. So we're getting very close. Yeah, looks like we're going to be right at about a little over 3 minutes when the end of the mallard phase begins, which will probably be about 385, 390 on this bean. So here we start first crack at 390 degrees at 10 minutes and 12 seconds. So we did about a 3.5 minute mallard phase, which is awesome. Now at this point, I'm going to cut back my gas a little bit more, not a lot since I got 5.5 pounds in there. I'm going to bump my airflow up to about 6.5 because 5.5 pounds is a really big load on the drum. I don't want to bump my airflow up so high that I end up pulling some of the lighter beans into the chaff unit. So 6.5 seems to be good. You may be able to hear we're going into a rapid first crack. I'll try to bring you over to the viewing window so you can see. I don't know how well you can see because the lighting's kind of messed up, but here we are. We're at 408 degrees, 11.5 minutes. So we started first crack at right at about 10 minutes, 12 seconds. So I want to take this up, if I can, to about a 12-minute roast. So it's 412 degrees, 11 minutes, 44 seconds. I'm bumping down my gas a little bit to about 2.5. My airflow is set at 7. And I'm going to take this up to, here it is, 416 degrees, 12 minutes. I'm cutting off the gas. I'm turning on my cooling tray, and I'm dropping the beans. And this was at just a little bit over 12 minutes, a 5.5 pound roast. I don't know how well you can see it or how good the lighting is, but there's 5.5 pounds. And on this particular bean, you can see that even with 5.5 pounds, it's still only bumping the beans up with the mixing arms to about 1.5 inches from the top. So we could have done 6 pounds of this bean in this BC5. So I hope some of this information helps you with airflow and with your roasting. Thank you.